You're listening to the 40 Thrive Podcast, the show created for women 40 and beyond, ready to shake things up. And now, your host, Jackie McDougall.
Welcome to the 40 Thrive Podcast. I am so excited you're here today because I've got a killer episode for you. Moana Dixon is here. Many of you may remember her from The Bachelor years and years ago, but I was connected to her through a mutual friend who just thought she was a badass woman who I needed to know. And you know what? She was totally right. And so Moana and I got on the phone and we talked about everything from what she's doing with her business to childhood to fears. I mean, we had the most incredible conversation. And so we decided to get together and to chat in her downtown LA loft. And we shot the breeze for about 2.5 hours. So you're going to get half of this conversation with Moana because it's just so good. I'm telling you, full disclosure, I was never a fan of The Bachelor. I've worked in television, so it's just not even something that I'm kind of into. But Moana tells stories from her experience that will blow your mind. And also how it's really impacted, even though it happened back in her 20s, it's totally impacted her life now as a 40-year-old woman and business owner. So before we get into it, I just want to share a little bit more about Moana. She worked 18 years in the wine and spirits industry. She left her career as a senior executive to change the way you think and feel about the spaces you find comfort in. Over the past 4 years, Moana has turned her small company, The Hunted Fox, into a full-scale custom design house that works with designers across the globe on everything from homes to television sets to weddings and events. The crazy thing is it all started because she would be traveling the world, and during her travels, she would get textiles and fabrics, and she would make pillows out of that she had collected along her travels. It was pretty amazing. And so she's got a huge commitment to quality, detail, and comfort. She and her team make beautiful home decor in downtown LA by hand. People, by hand. The company delivers products right to your door and can be found in retail stores all over the US and beyond. Her clients range from Gina Rodriguez to Rosario Dawson, Nobu Malibu, you know, that fancy restaurant. And also you may have seen her work on The Voice behind the scenes. So here's the exciting news. Head on over to huntedfox.co and get 30% off. That's right. Moana is offering 40 Thrive listeners 30% off everything on her website, huntedfox.co. Use the promo code THRIVE. Can you tell I'm a little bit obsessed with her business? I absolutely love the look and the feel of all of her products. But now let's get into the conversation I had with Moana and how, looking back on her life, you know, how many of us have looked back and gone, oh my gosh, I'm so glad there was no Facebook. But imagine having your memories and your experiences, maybe some when you were younger, on national TV. That's what happened to Moana. So let's just get into it. My conversation with Moana Dixon. I think we all, especially women over 40, can look back and think about some of those things that we've done. Yours just happened to be a little bit more public.
Yeah, it was a big one.
So let's go even before that. Let's go back in time. Talk about little kid Moana. What were you like growing up as a kid? And was that in California?
I'm a first generation Hawaiian, born here on the mainland. So I was born in Los Angeles. I grew up in South Orange County. So kind of Laguna Beach, just south of that, is used to be a quiet, sleepy little beach town called San Clemente. And it's completely blown up. But I grew up on the beaches and kind of running around, and I was wily, just a very adventurous, creative, I'd say spirited gal.
You had the Hawaiian spirit in you, even though you were a California girl.
Yeah, barefoot climbing trees. I had an older brother at the time, and then my parents ended up having, just to give you a bit of a background so it makes sense if we get into context, my birth mother is Hawaiian, and her and my father married really young, had 2 kids, and then split when I was really young. And then my father remarried when I was 3, and that's my mom. And she really raised my brother and I. And so she's South American and from Uruguay. And so I have this really kind of interesting dynamic of this Hawaiian culture and then Latin culture, these major influences of these two completely different women who are powerhouses in my life. But I grew up mostly with my father and my mom in San Clemente.
So what was that like growing up as, this Hawaiian girl raised by a Latina woman? Was your birth mom part of the picture?
Yeah, in and out. She's had a really incredible journey, and she's just been in and out, but not consistently. And I think she was really young when she had my brother and I, and she struggled with postpartum depression, and she just had to figure it out like we all do. So she was not a constant. And so we were in transit between, kind of the 909 Riverside and then Orange County. So we're like the real life OC. And then she lived in Los Angeles and North Hollywood for a while when we were kids. And then she moved to Vermont, I think when I was in high school. So there was a touch and go.
Did people think that you were then South American?
It's ironic that people have always guessed very inaccurately what my ethnicity is. But when I was younger and waitressing and bartending, it was the best way to make a quick buck was to get the table to bet on what I was, and I would take the pot if no one got it.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, I'd write it down,
right?
Put it under a cup, and off they'd go. And yeah, it was just I'm Italian if you're Italian. I was Egyptian if you're Egyptian. I'm definitely Persian, and I'm not speaking Farsi to you for some reason if you happen to be Persian or Iranian, etc. But I also grew up speaking Spanish with a Castilian accent from Uruguay, and so that created confusion because we're close to the border. And you have just a huge Latin influence in Southern California. So it's a whole different dialect. And it didn't translate very well either. And so people were just always confused.
So that must have been like stupid human tricks, right? At parties, first of all.
Yeah.
Like you were an entrepreneur because you would have people bet on your, on your background.
Maybe that's where it started.
But it also kind of lends to what you're doing now and how invested you are in different cultures.
I have not really considered that.
I just see you as somebody who's curious and embraces the difference in people. I don't know, maybe part of your upbringing. I'm not a shrink. I know it's shocking, but I'm not a therapist. But I can imagine growing up in this way of seeing different cultures and how it influences people, how it could actually.
That is a really interesting insight. And I really appreciate and receive that because I feel like when I was growing up, I always was trying to figure out where I fit in. And I would have never described myself as the person who had a group of friends. I always had groups of friends. And I was friends with all types of different people. And I also, kind of, lost in translation or picked up in the absence of the understanding of two completely different worlds that really seem to oppose each other. I navigated through different lifestyles and I guess technically economic statuses and how people operated when I stepped into one portion of my life and then moved back into the other. And so I was always, I guess, kind of like a cat trying to land on my feet and trying to figure out how to communicate with people and meet them, I think, at their level and still be true to myself as a young girl turning into a woman has always been a part of my journey. And I think that as I've traveled, and we were just talking earlier about Airbnb and that lifestyle of traveling like one who lives there, it's always been my desire to really connect with people wherever I am. And maybe you're right. Maybe that is part of the really great benefit of what seemed so tough growing up.
Yeah, I think when we have enough distance sometimes from something, we're like, oh, I actually have some pretty amazing qualities because of what I went through.
I kind of feel like that's the goal. And I just turned 40 in December. So of course I'm in the rewrite, right? So I'm doing it. I forget who it was that I loved. I want to say your third or fourth podcast where she says something to the effect of 40 women go through this where they just blow their lives up.
Oh, yes. Diane
Yes.
Wingert. Yes.
She's awesome.
Yes, she is.
Awesome. When I heard that, I was like, preaching. I will be your choir for the day.
And she talks about how you don't, she kind of blew up her life and that we have this drive to want to.
Yeah.
Is that what you're feeling right now?
100%.
Wow.
I'm in it. But I think as I'm doing that, I'm also trying to kind of check myself. And I really received and appreciated her very honest, transparent feedback on that experience because it really did help me kind of put it into context and say, okay, you don't need to blow everything up. Maybe you just need to start looking at some things differently. And that's been a huge part of just where I'm at in this part of my journey is really reflecting on the first 40 and saying, okay, not all of this was bad. In fact, how can it serve you? How does it serve you? In fact, let's make sure that it does. And I think rewriting how I was just listening to Joe Dispenza. Are you familiar?
I'm not.
Oh gosh, he's brilliant. He did a documentary years ago called What the Bleep Do We Know? And he's written some really powerful books, but he also does some public speaking. And he basically was talking about, by the time you're, I think, like, I forget which age, but maybe around midlife, about at least 50% of how you recall your life is not true, because you change as a person. So the way that we recant the history is inaccurate in the context of current reality and or the way it actually happened.
Right.
Because you're viewing it in retrospect, but you're not the same person you were when it actually occurred. So what Joe Dispenza really focuses on is the power of the human brain and the authority that we have to rewrite our own history. So for instance, to speak to your younger self and say, hey, at 14, when you were really struggling with all these feelings of self-worth, and I'm 40, and those weird feelings are coming up again because this stupid thing happened at the grocery store today. Yeah. You can stop and say, okay, my 14-year-old self gets to receive all the care that she didn't get from my 40-year-old self, and I can begin to rewrite that part of my personal history by speaking into it today, which actually begins to heal and change those memories, because Einstein's theory of relativity and time, right, as it collapses. So your current reality and the way that you choose to see things is really all that matters. So it doesn't matter what happened, but if this is how I choose. So yeah, I had a bunch of shit. First 40, I probably blew it up in my 20s for sure. Definitely blew it up in my 30s. But now I get to sit here and say, okay, how can that serve me? How can I rewrite any of those stories? How can I make or take the best out of it? And what you just said about my childhood and going back and forth was an awesome and brilliant way for me to view something that I just hadn't really encountered yet.
Well, I think other people see in us what we can't see ourselves. I relate so much. My mom died when I was 3, and we talked a little bit about this. I was the youngest of 11. My dad got remarried to a former nun. It was like, I mean, you can't write it, right? Yeah. It's like a Lifetime movie, or The Sound of Music, one of them. You know, you do tell yourself these stories and how these things happen to us or around us, but we don't necessarily look at, like, you're amazing and badass today. Let me just do it this way.
I was just gonna say thank you.
Well, you are. But have you ever been to a party and you're talking to somebody and it's painful to speak to this person, and then you discover that they had, like, what, quote unquote, a perfect childhood? Like, they had no... Yeah. Everybody has, issues and challenges at one point or another, but there's nothing to speak of. And I talk to people sometimes and they really get stuck in their own way. And, I know people who are like, if you look at their past, there's not a lot of adversity and they don't have any coping skills or ability to see life in a way that I believe that people who've been through some shit do.
Question. Mm-hmm. I might just be the worst. I think I'm going to break the rule here and ask you back a question.
Oh, there are no rules here.
Do you think that, I feel like it's not necessarily that people haven't experienced adversity, but they're really disconnected from receiving the lessons that the adversity should have presented in their lives?
Oh,
like, do you think
really
that there are that many people that had perfect lives?
Yeah, I don't think perfect, but I think
just meaning mellow, easy go, just no issue.
I would go with, like, no trauma when I talk about, like you've been through trauma. We've been through our own personal separate traumas. There are people out there who didn't necessarily, and you're right, maybe there were traumas and they just don't even acknowledge them, because sometimes you see two people going through the same thing and one chooses to grow from it and one chooses to ignore it and sort of criticize the one who is using it to grow.
Totally. So I'm just so not going to give you my personal references, but yes, 100%. I was listening to another great podcast, this gentleman, Luke Story, who when I was young and in Hollywood was just one of the guys about town and everybody kind of knew. And back in, like, the Brent Bolthouse days when partying was the thing and everybody was out partying because there weren't cell phones. And so it was,
thank God there were no cell phones.
When LA was fun. He now has this really great podcast called The Lifestylist or something like that. He was talking the other day about trauma, and he said something that really stood out to me, that the human brain doesn't process any version of trauma differently than another person's version of trauma. So if your life was vanilla, and you had a breakup at 16 and that to you is trauma, that could be just as bad as being physically or emotionally or sexually abused to another person, because the way that your brain processes it in relationship to the rest of your life. I've had so much trauma that I have a higher temperature range for trauma, but it's still, when trauma really hits, it's just as bad as trauma for somebody else, even though if we were to talk at a party, I might think you're ridiculous. Your trauma is embarrassing. Right. Get a grip. My mom said to me the other day, I think one of the best one-liners I've ever heard. She said she deals with inner healing. And she said, I was working with this person and it's going to take a lot of work. And she said, it's like, you're talking to a fish who doesn't know he's wet.
Wow. And
I just kind of ripped the lid off of, whoa, yeah, that's what disconnect looks like. That's how I feel like most people show up in life is we're totally, you may be traumatized, you may have gone through some stuff, but you haven't chosen to step into it and be vulnerable and messy and connect with people on it and say, this is something that I either need to expose or speak about or connect with other people on so that I can learn and grow. They just aren't aware of it. Right. And they haven't accessed it. And so I think to that degree, people think that we can compartmentalize. I definitely thought for the majority of my life that I was a brilliant, packer of trauma and things that I could, I had these little blue boxes, these like Tiffany blue boxes with white bows, right? That all my bullshit lived in.
Right.
And I, had them stored up in my closet and they didn't affect me. And how wrong I was when big things like showing up on national television and being annihilated in front of 21 million people and then seeing the feedback online and all the backlash or whatever. Then all of a sudden, all those Tiffany blue boxes with those white ribbons just busted open. And all of these things that I thought that I had dealt with, managed, reconciled. Actually, that's not true. I thought I packed them up and put them away. All of a sudden, it's like opening that closet and they just bust out. And I think that life does work that way. If we don't really do the work to clean up our junk, it's just sitting there waiting to bust. When the proper circumstances of life give it permission. And I think that that's maybe another way to perceive some of those people, which I think are most of the people in life that seem like they don't have anything going on. Maybe they're just not showing up to it yet.
But also you make a great point. When you've had your arm cut off and you're bleeding without a limb and you see somebody who broke their finger, it's very easy to go, are you kidding me? You broke your finger, suck it up. And that's totally not okay, because you're absolutely right. Everybody has their own trauma and their own pain. And so whatever it is, like pain is pain. And so when you've had more experiences in your life, you tend to compare. We're so guilty, especially online and with comparing people's pretty lives with each other. I'm not living up to someone else's beautiful Instagram feed, but we also compare when it comes to pain. And because we want to validate our own pain, that it actually is something like, oh, but look at what happened to me. Like I'm able to, this is okay that I feel pain because did you see all the things that happened to me? But we shouldn't be doing that because there are other people, like you said, who might be traumatized by a breakup at 16 and have to work through that. And so you kind of open my mind a little bit to just everyone, we all have our own journey. Some are a little more colorful than others. So let's talk a little bit about that. So you've had your experiences growing up, and then what made you decide to were you moving into the Hollywood scene before The Bachelor happened?
Yeah, yes. I was in my 20s and I got a job working in the spirits industry, and I was, launching these brands. And
so were you one of those girls like in the bar, little hot girls that were selling the spirits?
Yes, but on the corporate side.
Because I always appreciated the free drinks.
Yes. I wasn't the gal, with the tray, like offering the drinks. I hired those, God bless. I worked directly for the brands, and it was my goal to build recognition and, guerrilla marketing on the street, but sales technically. So without getting into all the funny, laws of our 3-tier taxation system, post-prohibition, the way that the government works is if you wanted to start a wine, you'd have to go through another distributor in order to actually sell it to a restaurant or a hotel or...
Really?
Yeah, because 3-tier taxation, what prohibition did when our government said, hey, just like they're going to do with, all the stuff that's going on with marijuana, when we're going to legalize this, we are going to get paid. Mm-hmm. So the way that they set that up is the creators of the product have to sell it to a distributor. And then that so tax number one, then the distributor sells it to the retail. So you're either a mom and pop liquor store, or you're a grocery chain, or you're a hotel or a restaurant, whatever. Now it's taxed again. Then when you sit down to have a glass of wine at dinner, you pay tax on that drink for the third time.
Wow. I never even thought of that.
Yeah.
So they're making, my glass of wine is making the state a lot of money.
Tons of money. Buku bucks. So the way that works is now I get to work for the brand, which I did. And I worked for startups, and I had some really fun big wins, and we put a lot of neat products into the market. But it was my job to network with all of the club owners and restaurants and hotels and all the fun stuff that's going on. And when they do a big, rooftop pool party, to pour Sky Vodka, which was the brand I was working for in my early 20s. And it was, brand new, this, blue bottle, nobody heard of it. And so we had, an expense account, God bless. And we got to go out and take our hot girlfriends out to buy a bottle at a whatever, and hang out and get people to try the product by inviting them over to hang out with us. Or, just go to restaurants and get them to put programs together, like putting a product on the menu, et cetera. So that was my 20s.
Oh, wow. So you were moving up the ladder at that
bouncing.
point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Having
fun.
a good time, making some money.
Yeah.
And then how did TV kind of lure you in?
Oh my gosh. It was brutal. Wildly enough, I, at the time, was not hugely invested in television. I had a TV in my home with probably basic cable and HBO, and the internet was not what the internet is. So you didn't spend a lot of time really on the internet. And so you're out and about, you're social. And to be in LA in, the early 2000s, like I was saying, every kind of young celebrity, this is, when Paris and Britney and, Kim and everybody's running around. We're all kind of running in the same group, if you will. And every time you went out, Leo DiCaprio is there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was really energetic and fun.
It was a given.
Yeah, it was a blast, like Teddy's on Tuesdays.
That's funny.
Yeah, I'm sounding more shallow the more I speak about it, but
no,
it was just so fun.
I was a few years ahead of you. So for me, LA was like the mid to late 90s was my big hurrah. So it wasn't Leo necessarily yet. I think I'll have to think about. Yeah,
it was Johnny in the Viper Room.
Yeah,
Sunset.
exactly.
Yeah.
It was probably the Johnny Depp days. So.
That was when we were sneaking up to LA, like underage.
This is what 8 years will do.
Yeah, totally. But so we would drive up, and when I was in high school, and use whatever fake ID whomever had lent us, somebody's older sister.
Right. I was Jennifer Gagnon for 4 years, but that's a whole other story.
Amazing. Yeah, I think I had a bad Echo Park version at some point. But so we were so the energy of being out and about was more entertaining than sitting in front of a television or being inside, where now it does kind of seem like girls might lounge around and watch YouTube video, I don't know, silly stuff, like at home and on their computers or phones, you know what I mean, and share. Yeah. But we didn't socialize that way.
Right.
You really were social and you interacted. So by the time one of my neighbors, who was a casting director, kind of started hounding me to go and do this thing, I didn't really have any context for it. In fact, I had never seen the show.
I was just reading that online, that when you were going through it, and I think it was your mom was like, she's never seen it before.
No. So you can only imagine. I was,
oh my god,
for some reason thinking the other day, they sent me this questionnaire, and I gave like paragraph answers to these questions, like, what kind of guy do you like, and who's at your home for the home date? And I was like throwing a party, not realizing that the goal of the home date was that they meet your family.
Oh,
I didn't get it.
Yeah.
So I answered this questionnaire like a complete jerk. I was just at that time building a brand, and they had just, I think they were going under, and they had just given me a really nice, like a 6-month severance package. And, I was doing pretty well at the time anyway. So a severance package was like great in 26, and, go sit for this casting. And I thought, you know what the heck? Why not?
Right.
I never really had the desire to do anything like that, but what the heck? I'm 26, live once. My frontal lobe is just finally starting to solidify. So of course, why not make a few more dumb mistakes before it's over?
Right. I mean, come on now.
Yeah, I remember I went and I drove out to, I want to say, the next building in Sherman Oaks, where Next Entertainment was.
Okay.
And I sat down. I didn't care. I didn't give a shit. And so I was just kind of brassy, and this is,
Yeah, you were probably in just for that.
Oh, I just thought it would be
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. But
Just
I mean,
to-
that's why they cast you.
Oh, I
because
get it,
to
yeah.
have you walk in and not want or need the job, they're like, she's in.
Totally. And I had a lot of bravado, and I just kind of had, I was, tomboy, but girly and
Yeah.
just totally confused. And so I was the hot mess that I probably was at 26, sitting in front of them. And I remember them saying, the producer really wants to meet you. They were like 2 weeks from flying. They were at the end of it. Like they'd already, like the bubbles had been burst. I casted with them for a couple of years after that. So I know how the whole thing works now, but then I didn't get it. And clearly, why would I? So we kind of chatted, and they said, hey, do you want to go do, because you have to do this crazy psych test and then a major overhaul on your physical, which they check you for everything A to Z.
Okay.
And so again, I'm 26 and I'm like, free everything.
So they're making sure that you're healthy enough and that you're not
mentally and
batshit
physically.
crazy.
Yeah.
Well, just enough batshit crazy maybe they want.
Well, to be
but
fair,
not where they'd be put,
to be
on
fair,
on the stand.
yeah, and maybe this is a hypothesis, but I'm gonna say my older self would say, you silly rabbit. They didn't want to make sure you're healthy. They wanted to figure out how to navigate you. It's television. That's their job.
Yeah.
They need to know what they're working with.
Right.
And I would do the same thing. So I think that they do a psych evaluation.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there's a liability. Are you healthy? A. B, are there any triggers or little strings that we might be able to pull?
Right.
Brilliant TV.
Right.
And then the physical part is, again, just normal. Make sure you're physically safe, because when humans interact, things can happen.
Right.
And we don't want to be liable. So they're covering their buns and making a good bet.
And they're like, oh, okay, she's, I'm sure it's messed up, but imagine that therapist. Imagine that, their job is to, one, protect their ass, and number two, to make sure that they share probably some of the triggers and some of the things that would have gotten you to become good television.
I actually had a really interesting experience with a therapist, but maybe I'll get to that later.
Okay.
But really, we had a really interesting connection, because, by the way, when all the shit goes down, she's there.
Okay.
And so after they drive you around, and you're gonna cry, but it's just a matter of time probably. And then they get it on film and they exhaust all of that. Then she just shows up out of nowhere and to, finish the process, make sure everyone's okay. And she was really affected. She was devastated.
Really?
Yeah.
By
it was really
by
interesting.
which part? By the end, the end?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we have to get into that. So
it was brutal.
I got to tell you, I think I've seen The Bachelorette once, and that was the first one with Trista. And as far as The Bachelor goes, I don't think I've ever seen a full season. And so I was like you, right?
Yeah.
But I know Monday nights people go crazy. It's like you can't even get on Twitter. It's a mess. But so you get on the show and you join them. Where's the house at this point? It's in LA.
I did all the free stuff, and then I said, no, thanks. I don't want to go.
Wait, what do you mean free stuff?
I did all the physical stuff. I got 100% there. And it's like interviewing for the job you don't want.
Right.
Right. Just to sharpen your skills, or to say, meh, they offer, they want me, but I don't want
You do it
them.
to have the choice.
Right.
Right.
And I said, no. So 2 or 3 days before, I've got the ticket, I've got everything. And they just were like, what? So they ascended. And I think the day and a half before, I was still not getting on that plane.
Really?
Yeah. And then I ended up packing up.
And they were paying you a good amount at that point.
Hell no.
No?
Negative. I was under the impression that there would be something. No.
Wait, there's no payment for
Negative.
that?
Negative.
Oh, no way. Is that still the case? Do you know?
I have no idea.
So you were going to do the show, or at least the ones who were going to do the show for free.
Yeah.
And how long were you expected to be gone?
2 months to a little bit more, because it was abroad. This was the first time they ever went abroad.
Okay.
And so
where
they had
was this, in
navigated
Paris? Okay.
It was outside of Paris. They had navigated through which is why I think they ended up buying a house here in Calabasas, because all the travel, not only is it expensive, but the time, and then all the additional, money's in production, because you're moving people and equipment.
Wow.
So it was a little 2.5 months. And I fly to Paris.
Wait, so hold on. Don't bury the lead here.
Okay.
So you're a day and a half out and you're not going.
No.
How did they change your mind?
Was
there a lot of Sky vodka involved?
Actually, I remember this so very well. I was down at my parents' house and I really, really grappled with this decision. Like this was for some reason I was tormented over, do I go? Do I not go? And
why do you think that was so hard?
I've learned to experience that when I really, really grapple with decisions, it's been my experience that there's something in that experience that life is determined to bring me to, one way or the other. And I'll grapple with it now and I might decide not to. And then I miss the lesson or the thing, the experience, the whatever. And I've had so many times where it's worked out both ways, where something was like this one was a big one, but the energy over making the decision was so big because the experience ended up being so big. And it wasn't because I intended for it to be, but that's what was waiting for me on the other side of that choice. Wow. And I was really tormented by it. And I was down at my parents' house and with one of my cousins. And gosh, I knew I'm just not that kind of gal. And I knew and other people had seen it and said, you are going to hate this. And this is not you. And this is embarrassing. And they do this thing in a jacuzzi. And I'm like, that's just not me. You're right. I'm not. And how embarrassing. And I was really 26 and concerned with what everyone was going to think about me.
Did part of you think though that like, I'll show them a different way. I won't be that girl. I'll bring some class to it or some depth.
I think I was fully aware that I was going to show up as me. Mm-hmm. And if I was going to go, I was not going to be managed or controlled, which I think I really successfully did. I stayed true to myself. I was not very easily produced, which they didn't love.
Yeah.
But I became great friends with the producers.
Right.
Ironically.
Because they probably respected that.
Yeah. It's funny. One of my very dearest girlfriends to this day was one of the producers on that show.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, you probably made her life like a little difficult during, but I think that
she really disliked me in the beginning.
But she probably had respect for you sticking to your own values.
I think so. Yeah, I would say so. And I think the other thing
which makes a great friend.
Yeah.
Just not a great, subject to produce.
Totally. She would say that. But we had a moment, which the only thing that they showed on me that was like so humiliating was when she had asked me to do something over again. It was really emotional. And I said, no. And she said, you're going to get me fired. Please, I'm asking you. You have to say this again. And I said, absolutely not. It's not going to come off as true. And she said, I'm begging you, please. We'd really become friends at this point. And so I redid it. And of course, they showed the dumbest, lamest version. That was the crappy one that I had, I did a favor for her. And they showed the dumb one instead of the good one.
And so it didn't feel authentic?
No.
Yeah.
Well, that was like, as they're trying to now build the case, in the opposite direction at that point.
So in the experience, you come in and did you become friends with any of the other women on the show?
Yeah.
Or was it really as bad as it makes it, like they make it look?
No, became great friends. In fact, two of them were in my wedding. They're two of my best girlfriends to this day. Yeah. And ironically, one of the gals was kind of the leader, one of the leaders of the wolf pack that when they all kind of ganged up on me. And I just ended up becoming, she's just one of my iron girlfriends. She's just solid and we're very close.
Is that, what people are seeing on TV? Is that real? Like were women really kind of going after each other,
yeah.
or wasn't produced that way?
No, it was brutal. Here's what I would say. It's funny because you have these conversations, and even my mom was saying, it's just not real. And I had to slow her down and say, well, I'm real. And it was real for me. And I showed up there. And again, just like we were talking about, it can happen and you can either disassociate yourself with it or you can get into it and dig into it. And I showed up there and I was just me. I did my thing. So I made great friends.
Yeah.
I made friends kind of right off the bat. And then there were other girls who everybody showed up with their own bag, right? And so other girls were naturally insecure or kind of catty. And that's one thing I don't really do. I'm very, very, very competitive, but I compete against myself, not other people. And I don't like putting other people down, and I don't need to prevailed because I had to, put you down to do it. If I
Right.
prevailed, it's because I just fought hard. But they do create an environment, and they do it through how the producers interview. So for instance, Jackie, we have a mutual friend, and I say to you, gosh, I don't know if I should tell you what she said about you, but no, I don't want to hurt your feelings. Anyway, so I was talking to so-and-so the other day, and she was telling me about the lunch you guys had. Now I've planted a seed. I may not have said anything at all, but I could have planted a seed of insecurity or doubt or deceit. Or I could have even told you what she said about you
Right.
on camera in our conversation privately, just to get you to respond. Now I happen to have a camera sitting behind me, but the way this goes down is just like you and I are sitting here with microphones and headphones on, feeling silly for a minute. As we get into the conversation, the microphone and the earphones kind of go away, and we're just hanging out talking. And so there's a ton of different types of transactions that can occur in this conversation. I could lead us into a fight. You could lead us into crying. And there just happens to be a camera, like the fly on the wall. And you do forget about those things because you're a real person. And in those moments, you do extract very real parts of people. But I had 2 rules. I was totally going to stay true to myself, number 1. And number 2, I was not. And being true to myself meant that I wasn't going to talk about anybody. And I was just going to stick to what I was experiencing, what I was doing. And I really honored that.
So you weren't the sound bites they were pulling to
No,
bash
they hated
other
me.
people.
I mean, I gave silly, like, personal sound bites. And it's funny because even looking back, and it is a conversation for some weird reason that comes up between my mom and I from time to time. But looking back on it, and by the way, the footage is non-existent. Can't find it anywhere to save your life.
I got to tell you, I did some digging because I like to be prepared. There's not a lot out there.
Nope.
There's not. I was like, did she change her last name?
Nope.
Did she it's you? But there's nothing. What? Why?
I think that Travis went on to have a television show.
Oh.
And I think that preservation of
the doctor
image, of his image and reputation, I think just there are things that you can do to squash information on the internet, and it's been squashed.
Wow.
In fact, there was a whole bunch of press that everybody does afterwards.
Yeah.
And it was pulled. So they wouldn't let me speak on television. They wouldn't let me so Tyra had called me and all these other shows like normal.
Yep.
And they wouldn't let me do any of them.
Really? Could you not speak about those
Nope.
things?
I never.
Did you have a contract that you couldn't
Yes, I
speak?
did.
A non-disclosure?
Yep. I could not speak. I could not do anything. I couldn't even post on my MySpace at the time. I did post, and they made me rip it down and threatened me with negative edits because they were still editing the final. I swear to you, they were still, because they kind of pulled some stuff with my parents that was really crappy.
Oh, wow.
And that was the one thing that I felt really crossed the line. It's fine. I showed up for this. Mess with me if you want.
Yeah.
But I didn't give them really anything.
Right.
And so they didn't really have a lot to work with.
Right.
So they kind of made my parents out to look crappy, which it's bizarre how easy it is.
Had you
to
gone
edit.
back to your house for a date?
Yeah.
Okay.
We flew home. They meet my parents.
Okay. So they actually had your parents on camera.
on camera. So they edited my parents really poorly. And
I'm married to an editor. I know the
Yep.
power of editing.
Yep. It was brutal.
It can make you, honestly, I seem smarter than I am on the 40 Thrive podcast because of my husband's editing. But they can really make you look any way they want.
Yeah. And they did a number on my parents,
Oh,
my dad.
man.
And that's my dad.
Yeah.
That's my warrior, my father. And my sisters, were in high school. And it was brutal. So
Wow.
I wrote this thing, open letter kind of to ABC on MySpace saying, this is not a true depiction of my family. This was embarrassing, humiliating, and inaccurate and really wrong. And I got a call from
The legal team.
Yep. Saying, take this down. The show is not over yet. We will edit you poorly in some different words.
Wow.
They said, we will
Destroy you.
Yeah,
basically.
basically, if you don't take this down. So I had to rip it down. And so I was in a position where I couldn't even defend myself. And then when they did all the press and everything afterwards, it was really kind of a big deal the way it all went down. And I think that Dr. Phil had already reached out to him by this time because We wrapped in November and the show didn't come out until February. So the editing period, they had a long gestation period. Yeah. I think longer than normal. And because of the holidays and the timing of everything. So by that time, Dr. Phil, I think, had reached out to him, who produces now The Doctors, or how they got going. And they really wanted to preserve him. And he was respectfully, didn't exactly, I don't think he honored himself. In that moment, it was a tough thing. There was some, it was a tough gig the way it went down.
Yeah. How did it go down?
So I showed up in Paris with the same attitude that I had really before I left. I didn't really want to be there. And so then I'm stuck in a hotel for a week before we even start filming. And I called production and said, get me on a flight home. This sucks. I didn't fly here to sit in a hotel room. I was well traveled at that time too. And I thought, I'm in Paris and I'm sitting in a hotel.
You weren't allowed to go out?
No, you're sequestered. It was so ridiculous.
Were you by yourself or with other women?
Yeah, by myself.
Okay.
No, which is so weird.
Why for a week there?
Don't know. I don't know what they're doing. You're just supposed to sit there in your hotel room.
Just make you go mad a little bit.
So I just started jailbreaking.
It's like you're on a jury or something.
Exactly. That's exactly what it felt like. And I thought, I'm just not this kind of sheep. And so I started jailbreaking. And then I just said, hey, send me home or just get me a ticket. And what I really was going to do was go find a hotel and change the ticket. Oh, so I could just go and hang.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, why wouldn't you? So, because once they buy it, it's in my name. You can do whatever you want.
Yep.
So I think they kind of caught on. They didn't want to let me leave. And so they had some of the producers go out and take me out in Paris for the day and run around and go shopping and do all this stuff. And so I was like, all right, fine. All right, I'll do this first night thing.
The producers are like your personal assistants.
I was such a jerk. So then we do the first night thing, and I was kind of like, this is so cheesy. This
and that's when
so
you meet everybody?
Not my cup of tea. Yeah, you meet everybody, and I'm
paraded out.
Yeah, I'm like, this is embarrassing. It felt like a beauty pageant. It was just awkward. Yeah. And what I will say is, there, and I worked in the wine and spirits industry. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of adult beveraging, not a lot of food, and I had kind of learned some tips and tricks from having to entertain in my professional life, where I learned how to look like I was drinking and being social without really consuming all of the beverage.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I've got some really good secrets. But so I didn't really, I just I was on high alert. So I didn't feel safe at that time. Yeah. Letting my guard down and getting housed. Right. A lot of the girls did. And the first night you see all this stuff that goes down. And it's because that happens at 5:00 in the morning when these poor girls have been, hopped up on champagne. They're exhausted and they haven't eaten. And any human being is going to be wonky at that hour. And they're freezing. And it's like, what? And I've been sitting in a hotel for a week for this crap. And then I get rejected and this is weird. And what is going on?
What do you mean you got rejected the first night?
The girl, all the clips that they get.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, in our first episode, we had this one doctor who was there from Miami, and she said, this guy isn't here for love. I'm 30-something and my eggs are rotting. And it was this big meltdown that she had, and people totally lambasted this poor girl. But she was right, and it was kind of crap. And, she showed up for the possibility of an authentic experience, and her version of it, what she received in that one night, which is what most everybody gets in that one night, sucks. And if you kind of get through that, then they figure out, they slowly sort of release you into the wild.
Do you actually have authentic experiences during this?
Well, we kind of, so after night one, night two, so after the first thing goes down, I said again, get me out of here.
Yeah.
So now they pull in the big guns and they send him to talk to me. And I didn't care. Yeah. I didn't even bother with him. So I was the one girl in the room that didn't even look at him. Because I didn't care. It was just like, all these girls are fawning over this guy. It's just not my style.
Who's this? She doesn't care about me.
Totally. So it had, the reverse pistol effect, like one of the Looney Tunes commercials where you tie the knot in a gun.
Right.
Yeah. So he and I sat down, and it was one of those life encounters that, as you know, happens very seldom, where it was just like lightning struck. Like, what the heck is this? I was begging to go home. And so we sit down and he just looks at me and he just like cuts through my soul, my bullshit, my facade, my, you know, I don't want to, everything, and says, I'm asking you to stay. I'd like to get to know you. And he was genuine in that. And we had this really we were both kind of taken aback by this weird, what the heck is this kind of conversation? And it was on. So from then on, I went from the girl, which I was vocal about it in the house saying, I don't want to be here, to holy shit, what is happening?
Wow.
And everybody else, it was really the reason why the dynamic does begin to occur between the women in the house is because anytime we were in a room together, we were like magnetic, and everybody else would become pissed. And I was like, please go away from me. These girls are going to maul me later. Right. And we very early on, he and I kind of started this like secret game. We were like passing notes and we exchanged iPods with like playlists on it for each other. And we kind of had this sort of secret, really kind of like sexy thing going on. Mm-hmm. Where not even the cameras caught it. They didn't know. So we ended up kind of, you know, like making out like in the hall, like off camera, where the producers didn't even know that we were like making out.
Right.
We actually, when we finally flew home, one of the head producers said, you need to kiss on camera this time. You're not getting out of this because it's not going to make sense what is happening between you guys if you don't show some interaction. Because we'd been kind of mauling each other off camera for weeks now.
So you were really falling for him.
Unfortunately, yeah. Again, true blue. I did. The funny thing is that we really encountered each other. Neither one of us really bought into the whole thing, and neither one of us really knew what we were doing. But I think I was the adventurous soul that he really longed for, and he was this real stable, solid soul that I really needed. And so we really, in that kind of perfect environment of humans being good for each other, had very different things that we brought to each other that were both of that healing nature, both of that satisfying kind of a need, but also a desire and wants, and just established kind of a balance. And we really connected, and we really talked a lot, and we really got to know each other. And one of the things that did start happening was, because we had already figured out how to circumvent the production kind of started giving up a little bit. And I think they saw that, and actually someone said to me at one point that they really believed that they had the next Trista and Ryan on their hands, and they were going to let it go. So when we flew home, they never do this. We all went out to dinner with the producers, because I had hung out with the producers because the girls were jerks. So I made friends with the people in the room, and we threw down and had great conversations and hung out and, you know, drank whiskey and wine and maybe smoked cigarettes, you know, and kind of snuck watching some of the other people's interviews and things that you're not supposed to do.
A lot of insider stuff.
Yeah. I could probably get a lot of people fired if I started giving names. I got away with
do that
murder.
Often, Mike.
Yeah. I got away with murder. Yeah. Because they're still on the show. I got away with murder.
Oh man, how many of you are on the edge of your seat like I was sitting in that loft in downtown LA? So stay tuned. Next time on the 40 Thrive podcast, I will have the rest of my exclusive interview with Moana Dixon. Be sure to subscribe to the show and you'll be notified as soon as it's up. And also share this with a friend. You know the one. She would love to hear this episode. Until next time, take care and keep thriving. Spring has sprung, and with the change of seasons, sometimes comes an increase in vitality. If you're feeling in the mood for a little more personal time, may I suggest Coconut. Coconut is all about providing clean and natural ingredients when you're enjoying your most intimate moments, with or without a partner. Naturally safe products developed by people who are obsessed with quality. Get 15% off with promo code GROWNASS at grownasswoman.guide/Coconut. That's 15% off with promo code GROWNASS at grownasswoman.guide/Coconut.